Hello and welcome to the UXJobs Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Sykes, and today we are broadcasting from the lovely city of Seattle, Washington. Now, we're getting a bit of a late start this week, but we have a bunch of great designers lined up in the weeks to come, and hopefully we'll be rounding out a regular schedule starting next week. I also just want to remind everybody the goal of this podcast is really to empower you to find your dream job or project and or get enough information on how to transition into this field. And as always, I don't do theory of garlic chicken. Nobody wants to know about the theory of cooking garlic chicken. They want an actionable step-by-step plan on how to do it. And that's really my goal, to make this as actionable as possible. So let's get right to it. I'd like to start off by introducing our special guest, Ryan Snelson. Now, Ryan is a designer based in New York City with focusing on UX and product strategy. In the last 15 years, he's worked at startups and tech companies, most notably Citymaps, Google, MySpace. He's been everything from a co-founder to a production monkey and has been thinking a lot about Internet of Things and its influence on behavior for better or worse. You can find him at ryansnelson.com or on Twitter at Ryan Snelson. Hey, Ryan, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, you covered a lot of it, but I'm a designer. I'm a UX designer. I'm a product designer. I go by a lot of names lately. Started out more of a traditional designer. I would say traditional, as in graphic. You're going into the late 90s now. And I really just wanted to make CD covers. That didn't pan out. There was something that was happening online, and CDs were disappearing. But interestingly enough, I started getting into websites from a purely graphic design angle. And I just happened to be in it at the right time, right place, where we were going kind of through that 1.0 revolution. And since then, I had been just honing in to practicing interaction, user experience. But it wasn't until I got into more of the tech company stuff where I really started practicing UX on a day-to-day basis.
Now, is this what you wanted to do when you grew up? Was this your
No.
plan?
I wanted to race motorcycles.
Oh, wow. I actually did not know that about you.
Oh, yeah. I did. And, like dirt bikes and stuff as a kid. And, but then I would have these reality check talks with my parents when I was really little, and they'd be like, what happens if something happens to you and you need a backup plan? You're not going to be young for forever. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I'm not going to get old, but time has proved otherwise.
What do you love about your job in the UX field? I mean, what gets you excited about it?
I love to make things. I love to put things out into the world. I love when people appreciate them in some way, shape, or form, and I feel like, wow, I contributed to that. I think it's two things. It's really the process of coming up with something, and then it's also, okay, this is what we're going to do. Let's put it out there, and then people receive it well or not. And if they don't, then you try to change it until they do. But I love that whole cycle.
What are you doing nowadays? Are you working for a company? Are you freelancing? What are you doing?
So right now I'm on two types of projects, mostly contract. One is hardware, camera stuff. The other one is streaming music stuff.
Fun. So what does your day sort of look like? I mean, you get up in the morning at 9 o'clock, you have coffee. Walk me through it.
Yeah, I get up in the morning, I have coffee. That is exactly what actually, that is pretty much my goal as a designer, probably until I can't have coffee anymore. But I get up, I have coffee, and then I ride my bicycle to work, which is good. I work pretty local in Brooklyn. And then we get in and we start. We figure out where we left off, where we got to do next. And typical design stuff.
What is that typical design stuff? Do you have favorite tools? What's the workflow look like?
For me, any project is really about thinking about it for a while. And that doesn't mean that I'm not doing anything. It means I'm thinking about it, I'm sketching it, I'm writing about it. And once I start formulating, like a model or an approach, then I have then there's a starting point. And then it really just comes down to levels of fidelity in those types of tools. So, to be specific, actually, we were using Photoshop for a really, really long time. And then the industry kind of shifted, and now everybody's using Sketch and InVision, which is great. But I found that I do a lot of stuff in Google Docs these days, like user flows. Yeah. You know what it is? I love to do flows and sitemaps and write requirements and put all that stuff together, even like zoning out like screens in Google Docs. This way I can send them to people and they can just comment on them really, really early. Like on Friday, actually, I'm working in Docs. I sent this document out, and there's like 4 or 5 people in the document, and I'm just like going to work just like I'm normally doing. I'm just like making all my modifications, and it's all happening on their screens. And I'm thinking like, oh, that's so weird. If that's not over the shoulder, I don't know what is. But in a sense, like I loved it because people could just see the thinking up to date as I was doing it. Like there wasn't this like, okay, let's wait for the big presentation on what the user flow is. It's like, no, here it is. It started out as a sketch. Here's a little bit more high fidelity. And if people are heads down, they can kind of pop into the document and make a comment if they need to, or ask a question if they have an assumption about something. And then we can resolve it and just change it on the fly. So Docs has been really good for me, actually, in the last couple of years.
I'm not totally surprised. I use Docs quite a bit. I mean, typically my workflow is I love Balsamiq. So I'm in Balsamiq creating visual notes, and I can move pretty fast in it. And then once sort of like the requirements are captured in a visual format, which is what I'm doing recently, then I move everything into Sketch, create the libraries, start building the design language. And
do you go library first? Do you build the design language first?
I don't because I want to capture requirements first. Like sometimes the client, they don't know what they want. So it's sort of like I'm taking notes, but I'm also coming up with some ideas to present to them. And then once we sort of figure out, or they figure out what it is, then I'm going back and thinking, okay, well, if we're using material design, we want all the modals to appear like this.
Right.
And if we're using tables, we want to. Are we going to have an expanding drawer and a specific row? And again, all of those choices depend on what type of information they want to display and what goals they want to have users accomplish. On Balsamiq into Sketch, and then into Zeppelin for SCSS or CSS extraction to the rest of the dev team. Do you do something similar?
Yeah, it's funny, as you're starting to talk about these tools, I'm always about use whatever tool that you need in order to pull off whatever you need to communicate at that time.
Sure.
So I think, some organizations, some teams, they'll be fixed on this is what we're going to use just from a procedural perspective. But I don't, if I'm working with a designer and they use Balsamiq or they use Sketch or they use Docs or they use, it doesn't really matter, right? It's get whatever you need to get out comfortably, because that level of fidelity is going to change, throughout. Obviously, if everybody's working in Sketch, you probably want to work in Sketch, just so that you can inherit and share files. But yeah, similar process. Writing requirements a lot is I actually enjoy it. It's like you're telling a story of what this could or should be.
How do you write your requirements?
Well, I think there's different types, different styles. My style is I'll write the name of the feature at the top, or if it's if it's a high level requirement, it pretty much captures early thinking of everything. And then I'll do an overview paragraph. This app or this product is about this thing, and then I'll write a problem or a hypothesis, and I'll keep it really loose in paragraph form. And then what I'll do is I'll just go into an outline mode, and I'll start defining things, even if it's like potential user, and I'll
Sure.
just like outline a couple different potential users, or a specific feature like search. Like, well, what kind of search are we talking about? Is it contextual search or is it global search? And then this way, it starts to open up the discussion a little bit more and get things more granular. It's like, oh no, we're talking about contextual. Okay, great. Now we can't do this and this and this, but at least we kind of know that.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. The tools constantly change. There's always new stuff coming in and out. How do you stay kind of current on what's going on?
I'm not.
I know that
I'm not. Every time a new tool comes out,
Yeah.
I feel like it's like a new song that came out and I don't know about it. It's like people are like, oh, do you know this prototyping tool? And I'm like, no, should I know it? Like, what should I know it? Do I have to know it? Do I need to use it? I feel like there are tools that are core tools like Sketch and Adobe and, some of the doc stuff. But for the most, InVision for prototyping is one that I like. But when new tools come out, I'm always wary about, do I really want to, first of all, invest in the learning curve? And do I want to learn this and then unlearn something else and then introduce it into my workflow? So I really have to just get that benefit demonstrated to me early on. I'm not like a tool junkie where I'm like, oh, there's a new prototyping tool. I have to go download it now and try it out for a month and then buy it. Like, not really. Yeah, I mean, tools are cool, but I hate the idea of constantly learning and unlearning things.
Yep.
I mean, when you've been in this field for quite a long time as we have, like, you remember the days of designing for websites that, the maximum screen width was 800 by 600, and you had to design it on 3 or 4 different browsers with 12 different plugins. So every time someone talks about tools and stuff like that, I have these like flashbacks of, okay, well, that's today. That's what people are doing today, but that's going to change. So I have to figure out what works best for me.
What are some of the hardest problems that you've ever had to solve as a UX designer?
That's a great question. Well, I feel like I could come up with problems at every place I've ever worked because that's kind of what UX design does, is try to solve problems. But the one that does stick out the most is city maps. I ran product and UX there, and when I first met the CEO, he was talking about this map idea, and I immediately said to him, well, why would I want to use another map? And his response was something along the lines of, exactly, like that's why we want to talk to you. and it clicked. I said to myself, okay, this field is really good, especially if you align with people and companies that are having problems that you could figure out how to make them better or to come up with something.
Sure.
For me, that was tough because it was like, well, yeah, we are making a new map, but what does that even mean? Because there's no added value or benefit to just another map. So then it opened up, more questions. Well, what would a better map be? What could a better map be? And they had some early prototypes of some really interesting vector interactions. And at the time, Google and Apple were the only ones with vector maps. So that was very exciting. So I actively left Google to pursue that. And it was just ramping up early stage, trying to figure it out. What we ended up doing was answering this like basic question, like, what's good around here? If I'm walking around the street and I have my phone and I'm looking at a map, how would I know what places or what points of interest are good? Because none of the maps had that perspective or that point of view on places. So
you realize there are so many startups that have tried to solve that problem.
They were, but we solved it.
It's awesome.
And it got acquired by Tripadvisor, so that worked out.
Oh, I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah. That's recent. They got acquired, which is cool.
That is very cool.
That was at the time Foursquare was trying to do stuff, and then
Sure.
they broke off into Swarm for the check-in crowd, and then they started figuring out like, well, maybe we can make this a little bit more about the point of view about places. But our UI was always about, at least at the time, was about starting with the map, not ending with the map. So like, if you were to look at a review on Yelp, you would probably read through like all this junk, all this garbage, and then you'd eventually go to a map to figure out how to get there. This was taking the experience and flipping it. So I'm walking down the street, I open the map, I see everything that's happening, and all of that social endorsement is just kind of like popping up for me.
Yeah, I remember being in the back of cab, seeing the city maps displayed in the in-cab thing that you mute every time, and I was just like, oh, that's Ryan's work. Cool.
Actually, that one was a tough one because the screens that Verifone had were mounted like kind of by your knees in the cabs early on. And I remember we went out there to the taxi place. I don't know. I think it was in Queens. And the guy who's at Verifone, he's like, we can't see anything, on the screen. So I sat in the cab, and the screen was facing my knees, and I said, "Oh yeah, you have to remount these screens." And he's like, "What?" Because the screen had flipped all the dark pixels to light and all the light pixels to dark. So it wasn't just affecting like the map; it was affecting, the NBC Jimmy Fallon TV shows and stuff like that. And then they eventually did. I mean, I wasn't responsible for that, but that was a problem because they were trying to retrofit screens into cabs that weren't set up for screens in the first place.
Where do you see the industry going? Like, are the phones going to get smaller? Is it all going to be telepathic? Or what are we looking at?
Your guess is as good as mine, but I do want to share something.
Please.
With you. The cover of New York Mag that just came in the mail yesterday has a old painting on it. And on the painting, there's this woman, and she's sitting down on, I guess, like on the grass. And they paint in a phone instead of just whatever she was holding in her hand. And the caption says, "Put down your phone." So this whole article is about like phone addiction and just like people just completely sucked into this world of their phone. And, if you remember this, like, this didn't exist 10 years ago.
I know. So
I don't really know, and I'm guilty. We're all guilty of it, but I really don't know like what the future is going to be. I mean, they always say like the best tech is the stuff that's invisible, the stuff that you don't really interact with, that's always there, like the Star Trek stuff, like the holodeck stuff. But I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I really don't know, Ben. It's too much. It's becoming overwhelming. There are so many apps that are out and then they disappear. There are projects that seem like they're going to do things good for you, or they're going to help you out in your life, and then 20,000 more apps that do the same thing come out. So then it's like the bar just keeps going up, 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 up. But they're all kind of becoming the same. Like everything's kind of peaking, I think, into this just area of sameness. That's just for mobile, though. I think there's some interesting hardware things happening. Like yesterday or last night, I saw Snapchat has those glasses now that you can basically stream your POV right to your Snapchat without using the phone.
Sure.
But I don't know. I think the future might swing back to less tech, but that's hard to tell. I always thought like handwriting would come back, and it kind of did in iOS 10 with the messages, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if you played around with that.
But
I love that. I love like, scribbling like little text messages to people or just responding in that way where I don't have to use the keyboard, or I don't have to process words that look the same as everybody else's words. It just gets so impersonal.
One of the common denominators through all of that, which seems to be, I think something you can lean on, is human behavior, right? The human operating system. It hasn't changed in a very, very, very long time.
Right.
Can I eat it? Can I have sex with it? Will it kill me? I mean, that is the human operating system. That's just the way it is. Does this problem, or the problem that we're trying to solve, is it a real human problem? Creating an Uber for ice cream delivery, is that really going to stand the test of time? Probably not. I don't know. There's no substitute for eyeball-to-eyeball connection. Like the human connection, like there's no substitute for it. And Louis C.K. has a great bit on like you're feeling uncomfortable, you stare at your phone. Man, well, if I'm in a socially awkward situation, man, that phone is coming out, and I'm going to flip through screens and I'll have no idea what I'm looking at.
You know, maybe all of these things are coming out into the world now because people want to fill these like distractions and this laziness that exists. And I think to some level we're all guilty of it. But you know, it's like, it's always that next thing. Like there seems to be this big obsession with that next thing, whatever that is, if it's a distraction, if it's a service. And it's becoming actually a culture, I think, in design where that's the head space.
Interesting.
I mean, my Twitter feed is disgusting with all the amount of like new gadgets and gizmos and thoughts and, you know, but it's this wave. It's just never ending. It's like, this company raised $1 billion to do this, and now there's this, and now you could do this, and now you can do this. It's like, should I do it? Should I be involved with this? Should I get my ice cream delivered to me right now?
Right.
Should I get it right now? Or should I walk to the corner? You know, like, so I don't know. I don't know. This is such an interesting time, Ben. We might have to listen to this podcast in 20 years and be like, whoa.
It is a real interesting time. It seems like it's very experimental. It's see what sticks. I have to tell you, like with VR, I was a little skeptical. I'm like, yeah, we'll see. And then when I was in New York recently, I went to a Samsung store over in Meatpacking District. It's Samsung's version of the Apple Store, and they had these little like sections, these booths that had the Gear VR headset. And, you know, personally, I was like, yeah, I know what this is going to be. I've seen Google Cardboard. And I went in there with this contempt prior to investigation perspective. I was blown away. I was freaking blown away. Like, VR was amazing. Yeah. I immediately went out and bought the Gear VR headset. I bought the phone, and I didn't put a plan on it. Wi-Fi only. And I started really diving deep into this because the immersive experience was really fantastic.
That's interesting because I had a similar experience with VR.
Yeah.
Like when I was at GA a couple weeks ago, I tried the Oculus and I was playing some space game and I was just floating around in space. And I was like, yeah, this is really amazing. And it kind of, it hits your senses so much that it makes going to the movies feel really, really boring.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You know, the movies have their own issues with the rise of like Netflix and all this amazing content. But you go to the movies and I forget what comedian said it. It's funny that you mentioned Louis C.K. before, but somebody said that going to the movies is like TV with strangers. It's like you're sitting around with all of these people and it's like, why not just get this stuff on demand in the comfort of your own home, because you can right now.
Right.
That whole experience is changing. But, you know, the flip side of this is everybody walking around with VR headsets. And that's just another level of distraction that I can't even imagine, like, what that's about.
I don't know if you saw the Emmys the other night when the Emmys, Mr. Robot won. And one of the lead character, I forget his name off the top, but he gets up there and in his speech he says, you know, I am profoundly alienated these days. And we all sort of are. And that's that whole technology barrier. And is VR a step taking us further away from connecting? I mean... Yeah.
I don't know. My hunch is it could, and it probably will in some level. But on the flip side of that, you know, quick story, like my grandfather... he was into ham radios his whole life. So when I was a kid, I was always going over there, and he was always showing me Morse code. And you know, he's like, "Look, I'm talking to Italy," and he would swing the antenna on the top of his roof, and I'd be like, "Yeah, that's really cool, Grandpa, but you know, internet." You know, he'd be like, "I don't want to deal with it. I'm not touching it. Like, I'd rather do this thing. This is what I love." But you know, once I was like growing up and you know, was away, and I started, like, he would visit my parents and then we would FaceTime, and he, you know, his reactions of like, wow, I can't believe I'm actually video chatting like he had never done it before.
Sure,
and it was
sure.
this like really amazing like connection that I got to have with him, you know, across the country. And it was like we were right there. So I think there's positive things to those types of connections and those types of technology. But it's like everything else. It's like, you know, if you use it too much, or if you rely on it for basic things like I need ice cream and I can't move, so I have to order it right now with my ice cream app. It's like, get up for a second and go get your ice cream.
Who would have thought Pokemon Go, right, would have been like the fitness app of the year, right?
I haven't played it, but I've watched people play it. You know what I'm into? 2 dots. That's it. 2 dots.
What's that?
Oh, for all the listeners right now, don't download it. You'll be addicted. You just connect these little dots and then they disappear. It's like a better version of Tetris. It's just so fun.
Okay.
But there's like hundreds of boards and people play it for years.
Okay. Well, another thing to try out.
No, don't do it. I can't help think about when I was a kid and I was playing Nintendo, you know, like playing like Super Mario or whatever. And, you know, people would be like, why are you wasting your time with that stuff? And it's so stupid. And I'd be like, no, you don't understand. This is amazing. And, you know, that's our generation, right? So, but now you have like kids coming up with augmented reality now, and it's just normal. It's just basic. Like little kids are swiping TV screens because they think they can tap everything.
I mean, we grew up with a black and white television that had like the UHF knob, which didn't actually ever do anything. It's totally changed. Question, what was your gut reaction towards the iPhone 7?
My gut reaction was, okay, cool, another iPhone. And that was it.
Yeah.
And as all the information started to come in, once they said the headphone jack was being, removed and it was replaced with these wireless earbuds, I was like, okay, that's interesting, but that also creates a problem because you can drop one or lose one. But then I started reading more about it and I started finding out that like it does all of these better things with the battery space in the actual device. There's more room for the electronics and they can get rid of these old ports. And, there was thoughtful design in it. And a couple days ago, I read a really nice review on Daring Fireball about how the new phone has just kind of evolved, but it keeps the brand of Apple, like that is the brand. I think the article is called like Design is Brand, meaning why do some people feel like the iPhone has to be a completely new form factor? Right. With completely, new things in it. It's like, no, it's an iPhone. I mean, it's iconic. It's evolving. Look at the camera is like 1,000,000 times better. Like, I love photography. I would buy it just for the camera alone to have that capability. I don't know. I think like that's just another reaction I think that people have about tech, that it has to do all of these amazing new things, but really it's kind of doing all of these amazing new things in these increments. You know what I mean?
I do, yeah. The thing that amazed me the most, I mean, iPhone 7, eventually I'm going to go in that direction. Yes, the camera is amazing. The wireless headphones, it sort of reminded me, when I was a senior in high school, and this is 1993, there was a Japanese exchange student who had a cassette player that had wireless headphones.
Oh, really?
Oh, I'll never forget it. I was mind blown, boggled. Like,
did you put your hand between the headphones and the Walkman?
You better believe it. Unless I was being conned, it was unbelievable. And if that tech really did exist in 93, it's amazing to me. Like, 2016, it's now everywhere. Going back to like problem solved and design, like, you just think about music in itself and the evolution of just its playback, right? All of the formats that you've seen come and go, but really people just want their music, right? Right. That's just like everything else. Like people just want to communicate with somebody, or people want to do, like it goes right back to that basic human behavior that you were talking about. And, I had someone email me the other day and the subject was design advice.
And they started writing about all of this stuff about, AR, and my response was like, are you building this to solve a problem now? And if so, what is that problem? How are the users dealing with that problem today?
Right.
Or are you just sandboxing, and trying to make something cool? And I think that just kind of speaks to where we are right now. Like I think there's a lot of good that comes out of sandbox and experimentation and playing. But I think it gets weird when people are like, okay, let's use this as the replacement now to do this behavior. Or let's just use this. This is the new tech. This is how you get it done.
And then we just assume that humans will automatically change their behavior to meet this new technology.
Yes.
So if I want to be a UX designer and I grew up with all of this tech and I'm like, man, I want to build this. Where do I start? What's the first thing I do?
If you are already a UX designer?
I'm not a UX designer. It's just something that looks like a great job. I want to pursue it. What's the first thing that I would do?
Well, I mean, I'm a believer in getting some kind of training. So I think, there are places you can go, like there are classes that you could take. I went to art school originally to learn how to do graphic design, communicate. And I learned by doing. There's that flip side of this, right? It's like experience is the best teacher. I mean, you can't just like wake up one day and say, I want to be a UX designer. It's like me waking up today and being like, I think I want to be a lawyer. It's like, well, I have to learn about it now. I have no idea about how to do it. And I have to go learn about it. I have to understand it. I have to see if it's right for me. I think school is great for that. I think if you're lucky enough to learn on the job as an apprentice, like would be in the old days, that's also very good. But I also think it's what you bring into the actual role, right? Like, are you naturally creative? Are you a problem solver? Are you a writer? Are you, can you sketch? What can you do? I think you have to tap those personal skills and see how you can utilize them in or as a user experience designer as well.
Every time I get this question, I always say, well, do you have a smartphone? Yes. Do you have a favorite app? Yes. I say, okay, great. Do you have TVs at home? Do you have one or two? Oh, I have two. Okay. Start off by getting a sketch pad and in between commercial breaks, start sketching. Right. Sketch every day. I mean, How do you become a bodybuilder? You've got to get into the gym and lift weight one. How do you become a good writer? Right.
Yeah.
Get started doing that. Start deconstructing apps you use. Right. Do you know what a product storyboard is? No. I said, well, what's your favorite app? It's Instagram. Do you know how to take a screenshot with your phone?
Right.
If you don't, here's how you do it. Screenshot every single time the UI changes when you're using Instagram.
Right.
And then print those out and then recreate them with a pen and paper.
Right.
So that you start to look at things in a different light. I mean, they always say, like, what's the big value of going to law school? It's getting you to think like a lawyer.
Right.
Well, this is sort of an exercise to get you to start to think like a designer.
Yeah, I think thinking like a designer is the key. You have to turn that switch on so that you're observing the world in, through the lens of design. And it doesn't just end or begin at software. I think it has to do with everything. Now we're going to geek out with design of everyday things. Is this functional? Is this doing what it should do? When, the cover of that book has that coffee pot and the spout is facing the other way, so it's not usable. I was thinking about it that everyday things are now websites and apps. The software didn't exist at the level that it does now when that book was written, but it's true. It's like you have to observe how things are working and what their intent is. I also think that deconstructing things, like you say, like taking screenshots and stuff, that should be like a habit, like a daily habit. Like you download an app, it's like, okay, screenshot. Why are they doing this? And you put it at the... And nobody's telling you. It's not homework. You know what I mean? You're just you're so interested and curious about why something is the way that it is. Like when I started making websites, my first startup I worked at was in 1999 in New York. It lasted, I think, for 11 months before the company went out of business because of the dot-com bubble. And we were making websites. Part of that, like, learning at that time for me, especially for people that were just doing the design portion of it, was that you were expected to understand the programming of it. I would look at source code and copy source code and replace things in source code till I would get things and understand why things were happening.
Right.
Like, oh, if there's a couple tables here and there's an image in the table on the left and I replace that image, oh, look, now my image shows up. And then I just kept like deconstructing things like that until I understood those basic mechanics. And then I said to myself, man, HTML sucks. Have you guys ever heard of Flash?
Oh yeah, boy, I bit that bait hard too.
But that opened up so much in terms of interaction for me, because now it's like you can put anything on the screen. You can transition it in, you can transition back and forth, add sounds to it. And it just became like, I don't know, the web seemed so experimental back then, where people were just publishing out all of this random stuff. You didn't have like subscribing to content like you do now. So you would just check out these websites and they would be wild. They would just be wild. They would be completely unusable, but they would be really wild. And you'd try to find out how to interact with them. And of course, there was a lot of 45-degree angles in a lot of them, but still.
Boy, that's for sure. The site
45-degree angles equals the future, Ben.
I know, right? You see that in movies now, those panels that are like, high contrast border, 45-degree angle shapes, transparent in between. It's the James Bond interactive table UI.
Oh, it was the best.
What are the characteristics of the most successful UX designers currently? What would you say?
Oh, great question. I would say it's, I have this. It's 3 things. I'm thinking about it. Hold on a second. I'm having
no worries.
Okay. It's figuring out what's needed, designing what's appropriate, and it's communicating how to get it done. I think that's what makes it for me.
Questions that I get often are like, how much code should I learn to be a UX designer?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
Well, my thoughts now are you don't need to know code. You don't need to be a coder, but I think you should know what code does. I think you should have an understanding of what does an API mean for the developer, and understand if there's not one available and you want to do something, so that you can empathize a little bit with that developer. Knowing the difference between front end and back end, obviously. And then basic things, like if I wanted to change the color of this text, it's a CSS color, it's a hex color, it's, those are just the basic bare minimum stuff. But I don't think you have to practice coding every day to be a good UX designer.
I find that for me, like, because I started as a developer first, I think like a developer when I'm designing it. I'm thinking about like, okay, this would be the div and how would this work? And so I'm thinking in terms of development when I build it, and then also when I redline. If I ever have to redline,
right,
and hand it off. Luckily, there's tools that do it for me now. But if I have to redline, I'm thinking about at some point you're a front end developer. You're thinking, all right, what is the padding here?
Right.
And if you don't have specific instructions as a front end developer, you're going to wing it, and then you have the design and the finished working product are not exactly the same. One of the comments I used to get a lot is, all these sites. I had a period of time where I would just surfed nonstop. Yeah. And I created a library of patterns. Oh, that's a cool drop down. Oh, that's a really cool hover card. Whatever. I just collected patterns. Yeah. And saved them. And I had all of these sort of references and resources, and I played with all the jQuery libraries. Oh, look at all this cool stuff you can do. When we were in a meeting talking about what was possible, I was able to just reference all of these, like, oh, we could do it like this, and here's the library for it. So I think it's so important that designers build that library of like resources either in their head or they create a Pinterest board so that they can reference it. If you understand how code works, if you play with these libraries and you click on the demo link, then you can actually say, oh, you know what? I saw that the other day. Maybe we can do something similar to this. Insert link.
I would also add to that especially if you're working on a team, that there's a level of collaboration with the engineering. It's like, how have you done this in the past, or what's a good way to do this? Or if you don't know what the possibilities are in that code, you could riff with the developer so that it helps spark your understanding of what those interactions could be as well.
I'm a junior UX designer. Let's say I graduated from some UX design course, and I have a little understanding, and maybe I've got a couple of class projects that I've put into a portfolio. Where do I go from there? Now what? What do you recommend?
Well, I would say that when you're coming out of school, it's normal to have school projects. First things first is to be okay with that you have school projects, because that's how you practiced at first. And this is, you're demonstrating your understanding based on, those types of restraints. I would also say that make sure that the school projects are good. Good doesn't mean you finished it and it's done. And look, you handed in your final project and you put it in your portfolio. Good means you've thought about it as much as you possibly could, and you've exhausted all the possibilities so that you can talk about it in a comfortable way, right? That doesn't say you have to know all the answers to it, but you're not doing it just to get it out there. You're doing it because you have genuine interest in the quality of the work. So let's assume that you have a good piece or pieces for your portfolio. That's really the proof. But I also think that personal projects also help extend that level of thinking. It doesn't necessarily have to be, here's my one project that I did, and it's an app, and I have, 4 screens for onboarding and like 5 or 6 of something else, and like a prototype that clicks through 4 times. That's good, but it's not enough, right? I always look for point of view. I want to see the interest level come up in a personal project or a potential project, because that just helps me understand their own level of commitment to something. So I would say definitely do that if you're talking about what kind of work you could have or should have. But then I would say, take on projects, but not big projects. Take on little projects. Scope them quickly and cheaply, because little projects lead to big projects. And then big projects lead to even bigger projects, and then the rest is history. And then finally, you're practicing and you have work and you can keep the lights on. I would much rather see a breakdown of the project from the beginning to where its end state is. How did the idea start? What was the hypothesis? Who are the potential users? What was your first iteration? How did you compromise based on that? What were the tech issues that you had, if you had tech issues? If not, that's fine too. Or, if it's a student project, what did the user testing find out when you tested that approach? So it's like just covering those bases, I think, are important, as opposed to a graph that says, first I design, then I ideate, then I test. That's kind of meaningless to me. That's an assumption, I think, that if you're a UX designer, you're probably working in some sort of, design thinking or, lean methodology. I would say the graph that shows that process isn't as informative as the breakdown of the specific things in the project.
I want to see the sketch on the cocktail napkin in the portfolio. And the full...
Oh, yeah. Sketch 100%. I want to see the sketch. Even if they sketch it after the fact, just amuse me then. Show me the sketch. Show me something. Show me some physical stuff as opposed to everything being in the computer.
Having a sketchbook in an interview, I think, is hugely valuable, because it really exposes how your mind works, right? Your innovative mind, which doesn't necessarily come through with, 1 or 2 high-fidelity final screens.
It's true. It is a mess before it gets to that high fidelity. So seeing a little bit of that mess, it exposes process vulnerabilities and, the way that someone shapes their thinking and narrows in on a final solution, I think. Getting started is about having really good soft skills too. Not thinking that, not going into a situation where you think oh, this is going to be difficult, or, oh, the client is going to be difficult. And I think that's something that junior designers often fall into that trap. I fell into that trap. I'm like, this is a difficult client, or this is a difficult working environment. I think you have to learn how to navigate those conversations as a designer, which takes practice. So you just have to be in them, and you just have to be aware that not everyone is going to think like this is a great idea, even if it is a good idea, and vice versa. And you just have to work on communicating things clearly, or trying to show some sort of validation about why that is a good way to go or not.
Well, one of the biggest issues that designers have these days is being able to defend their design in a conference room.
Yes.
And that's one of the workshops that we've ran over and over and over again, at least to build that muscle, so that way you're detached from your work. You can get the most out of that meeting, and you can also manage it so that it doesn't sort of segue into like where a button should live for 30 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of websites and apps and all this stuff now being an everyday thing, well, that means that everybody's using them, so everybody has an opinion about what should be done. You know, I think, look, as someone who's more senior now, and I look back in my junior days, I remember having like blowouts about where buttons should go, and like thinking back to it, it's just like, oh, that was so stupid. Like, what a waste of like time and energy. Like, who cares? Like, test it if it really is that big of a deal. Run a quick test, find out what it is, and then just move on.
I think the number one designer tattoo to get is it a risk to user goal? ?
Right.
If it's not, then move on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we could get too fixated on those micro things, for sure. I don't think there's one right answer to that. At the end of the day, it's just like, where do you want to put your time and energy, if it's really going to be a blocker or not? And sometimes you just have to be flexible with things and just say, okay, I'll do this now. And, you know, if it works out for everybody, great. If not, we can change it. Or, you know, unless it's just like a showstopper, I don't think it's worth fretting too much over those types of placements, unless it's breaking, you know, design patterns, or it's breaking heuristics. That's the other thing. Today, designers have all the resources to learn all the rules about everything.
That's true.
Like, you could just Google anything. You could just read the human interface guidelines, some of it. You could read 10% of it, and you know, okay, these are the right ways and the wrong ways to build an iOS app. A push interaction does this, the back button goes here. And if you start breaking that stuff, then you can't really have that conversation about button placement, you know? It's like this is actually supposed to be here, and we can't have it anywhere else, because that's the rule.
One of the trends I've seen with new designers is they try to recreate the wheel.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm all for innovation, but I think use it properly. Let's not recreate the table if we don't have to for data. And that becomes a really interesting conversation that I have to sort of very strategically and manage. This pattern works. It works so many other places. I don't think it's going to be a risk to user goal. Let's keep this and figure out if we can create something else that might create a, you know, maybe like a micro interaction on the call to action.
Yeah, it seems like all those patterns, they're there for us to utilize, and they make things easier, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So it becomes more about, well, if I can get from A to B, how do I do that in like the best way possible? Oh, look, here's a pattern that works, that's been tried and true, that users are familiar with. And to break that, you're just risking their understanding of what they think the system's supposed to do or not.
Ryan, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the UX Jobs podcast. My goodness, I think we have covered so much. Would you ever be available to do it again?
Yeah, this has been really fun, Ben. I'm happy to help. I hope it helped the listeners in some way, or they at least were amused. But absolutely.
Wonderful. Now, where can we find you if we want to learn more about you?
Well, website is great. Twitter is pretty good. At least I've been using Twitter more of like a news source, but I've been writing some Medium posts, actually. I've been trying to get into that. I've been writing for the last year or so. and I'm trying to give myself permission to fail, Ben. Putting myself out there in a little bit more of a vulnerable way as opposed to just straight up design work. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Let me know what you think.
Is there a URL that we can follow?
It's just my name for Medium, so I think it's at Ryan Snelson.
Ryan, again, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today. And folks listening, again, you can always find us on UXJobs.io and Twitter at IA_UXJobs. Ryan, absolute pleasure. And with that,
thanks, man.
We'll catch you next week.